He had been missing for 3 days. No radio, no signal, no help. Just blood, snow, and silence. Deep in the frozen wilderness of Blacktail, Detective Owen Callahan lay tied to a tree, left to die by the very criminals he vowed to expose. No one knew he was there. No one, except two shadows in the snow, a mother German shepherd, once presumed dead, and her pup, born of survival and silence. They weren't just dogs. They were ghosts of the past, and they had come back. What happened next will restore your faith in second chances, in loyalty that survives even death. Before we begin, hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and turn on the notification bell, because this is the kind of story that stays with you long after it ends. The sky over Blacktail Ridge, Montana, was a slate-gray bruise, heavy with the weight of more snow to come. Wind slithered through the pine trees like a serpent, whispering secrets only the wilderness could understand. 3 days of uninterrupted snowfall had smothered the landscape in white, softening the jagged terrain into something deceptively calm, an untouched world where time seemed to slow and the dead were forgotten beneath the drifts. Detective Owen Callahan had always respected the silence of the forest. Now, he feared it. He was 35, tall and broad-shouldered, with thick black hair cropped close to his scalp and a squared jaw rough with stubble. A scar ran just above his left eyebrow, an old injury from a knife fight in Chicago, a memory he rarely spoke of. His eyes, once sharp with sarcasm, now burned dull with fever and fatigue. His parka was gone, his gloves were missing, and his wrists, raw and bruised, were tightly bound behind a towering pine tree whose roots had swallowed generations of fallen leaves. Owen had been left to die. 3 days earlier, he'd followed a trail, an anonymous tip about a missing teenager last seen in the Blacktail region, known by locals as a dead zone for cell signal and a graveyard for those who strayed too far alone. The girl matched the profile of several recent disappearances, suspected victims of a growing trafficking ring operating through Montana's wilderness corridors. Owen hadn't told anyone where he was going. It wasn't protocol, but he trusted no one after realizing parts of the force might be compromised. He was halfway up the ridge trail when something struck him from behind, blunt, fast, and cruel. He remembered the snow swallowing his knees, his sidearm ripped from his belt. Then, nothing. Now his breath came in short, painful bursts that fogged the air before vanishing. His lips were cracked, his limbs numb. The frost was eating away at him inch by inch. Above him, ravens watched from their perch like silent judges. He couldn't feel his feet anymore. Time moved like syrup. The world was soundless, but someone was watching. 300 miles south, in the small city of Forsyth, April Monroe stirred her coffee with the kind of quiet rage only grief can build. She was 28, with shoulder-length chestnut hair always swept into a low bun and tired hazel eyes framed by round wire glasses. Her frame was slender, nearly fragile, but her voice could cut steel. April was a freelance investigative journalist, once idealistic, now hardened. Her cousin, 17-year-old Lily Monroe, had vanished 4 weeks ago after leaving her job at a coffee shop near the train station. The police had dismissed it as a runaway. April didn't believe them. After 3 weeks of chasing false leads, she found a single, unconfirmed thread. Detective Owen Callahan had been looking into the same string of disappearances and had gone off-grid shortly after. Her research told her he was one of the few who didn't take bribes, who didn't bend to pressure, and whose last known movement was headed into the Blacktail wilderness. April didn't wait. She booked a room at a roadside lodge near Blacktail Ridge, packed her camera, her notes, and the Glock her father gave her after Lily vanished. She wasn't a trained investigator, but she'd grown up reading her father's case files. He was a retired FBI agent, and had enough instinct to know this wasn't coincidence. Owen had gone missing, and she was going to find out why. Back in the forest, snow fell steadily over Owen's slumped form. His head sagged forward, breaths shallow. He hadn't slept. Too cold, too dangerous. He heard things in the dark, the sound of boots, a whisper of laughter, but no one ever appeared. He was starting to hallucinate. Hunger clawed at his belly like an animal. His body ached, and beneath it all, the unrelenting silence of the trees bore down on him. He thought of Shadow, his old K9 partner, a jet-black German shepherd with eyes like smoldering coals, had gone missing over a year ago during a failed raid near the Canadian border. Shadow had saved his life, tackled a gunman so Owen could take the shot, but vanished in the chaos. For weeks he searched. Nothing. Everyone said the dog was dead, but Owen had never stopped listening for paw prints in the snow. Now, on his third day in the cold, somewhere between waking and slipping into darkness, he thought he heard them again. Crunch. Crunch. Pause. Or maybe it was his mind playing tricks. He couldn't tell anymore. He closed his eyes and let the snow fall. The wind swept low through the pines of Blacktail Ridge, slipping like breath through the frozen branches. The snow had grown thick and crusted from nights of storm, hard-packed in some places, deep drifts in others that swallowed even the memory of a trail. The forest here was ancient and indifferent, its silence broken only by the soft, deliberate movement of two shadows. Shadow led the way, her paws landing with a hunter's grace. Her body, once conditioned to flat pavement and concrete corridors, had adapted to this wild world over the past year. But the terrain here was different, brutal and uneven. The snow beneath her claws shifted suddenly, revealing loose stones and icy roots. She paused, steadying herself before moving again, always cautious. Her breath puffed in clouds as she moved. Behind her, Scout followed, still growing, still learning. His larger-than-expected paws sometimes broke through weak layers of snow, causing him to stumble. But he never whined. He mimicked his mother's movements as best he could, head low, tail still, ears twitching at every sound. He was built like his father, broad-chested and bold, but it was Shadow's patience that lived in his bones. They had scented it hours ago, faint traces of blood, sweat, and human presence carried in the air, tangled between pine needles and wind. It was not a fresh trail, but something primal had stirred in Shadow's chest the moment she caught it. Something remembered. She hadn't known the man's name, only the rhythm of his voice, the pattern of his footsteps, the way he had once stood between her and a hail of bullets. Now she followed instinct. Scout stumbled again, caught in a patch of old snow clinging to brambles. Shadow turned, waited. The young dog shook himself off and pressed forward, nose to the wind. The air was shifting. The scent was stronger now, and laced with something colder, fear. They came to a rocky slope where the snow had hardened to ice and was broken only by claw-like roots twisting out of the ground. Shadow stopped and looked up the incline. It was steep, wind-exposed, treacherous. She calculated silently. Then she leapt, claws digging in. Scout followed, scrambling behind. Ice cracked beneath them. Snow gave way, but they made it to the top. What greeted them was a deep gully, blanketed in untouched snow. Scout paused, sniffing, ears perked. The scent was no longer just a trace. It pooled here, as if whatever they were tracking had fallen, bled, or remained still for a long time. Shadow circled the edge of the clearing, testing the air from each side. Then her ears flicked forward. A sound, distant, soft. A groan? Or was it just the trees creaking under the cold? She didn't move forward. Not yet. She crouched low, tail still, eyes narrowing at the woods ahead. Scout copied her posture, though his legs trembled from the strain. They stayed like that for minutes, silent, still, and watching. Shadow's instincts warred within her, move toward the scent, or wait and assess. She chose the latter. In the wild, hesitation could save your life. So they stayed at the edge of the gully, hidden in shadow, until they could be sure. Far south, in the outskirts of Hailston, the snow was turning to slush on the road leading to the last fueling post before the wilderness began. The town was quiet, its buildings weather-beaten, and its people wary of newcomers. April Monroe parked her car outside a rusted general store with a satellite dish nailed to the roof. Her boots crunched against gravel and snow as she stepped out, pulling her coat tighter against the wind. She'd been driving for 6 hours. Her face was wind-chapped, and her fingers ached despite the gloves. She carried a satchel over one shoulder. Inside, a file of printed camera footage, handwritten notes, and photos of Lily Monroe, her cousin, the one who had vanished. Inside the store, an old heater hummed near the front counter. Behind it stood Walter Dean, the store's owner, early 70s, barrel-chested with a trimmed white beard and a cap that had seen decades of Montana winters. He was the kind of man who didn't talk much unless you gave him a reason. April did. She laid out a photo of Lily and another of a black van with covered plates. I think this passed through here 2 weeks ago. Walter looked down, then up. His eyes changed. You from around here? No, she replied, but my cousin passed through, and she never came back. He grunted. Saw that van, pulled off the road right before the split north. That's logging territory, old trailheads, no cameras. Anyone with it? 2 guys. Didn't stop to talk. One of them looked twitchy. April leaned in. You remember anything else? Direction? They headed east, Blacktail side. But if they went that way, you won't find many friendly faces. April nodded. That's where I'm going. Walter hesitated. If you're smart, you won't go alone. I'm not smart, April said quietly. I'm desperate. He said nothing more. She stepped out into the cold, the snow swirling like ghosts around her. The road ahead narrowed into dark trees. Back in the forest, Shadow moved a few paces forward before stopping again. The scent was close, but the air had changed. There was human scent, yes, but also metal, rope, and blood. Something about it made her muscles lock tight. Scout nudged her hind leg, nervous but ready. They would not rush, not yet. The wild had taught them that timing meant survival. So they waited, on the ridge above the gully, the snow falling silently around them like a shroud. And the man, whoever he was, remained still beneath the tree, unaware that he was no longer alone. Snow shifted beneath silent paws. The air was sharp, crystalline with cold, and the forest was still except for the subtle rustling of pine branches shedding their burden. Shadow stood halfway down the slope, her amber eyes locked on the dark form slumped against a pine. The smell in the air was stronger now, blood, human sweat, and something older, something she once knew. Her body went rigid, tail low, ears alert. Scout trailed behind, his long limbs awkward on the uneven terrain. He was still growing into his body, still learning to read the forest. The young German shepherd sniffed cautiously, noting the foreign scent with curiosity and unease. He glanced at his mother, then back at the motionless figure. A soft whimper escaped his throat. Shadow didn't move for a long moment. The wind ruffled the fur along her shoulders as if urging her forward. She took a cautious step, then another, each one slower than the last. Her gaze didn't leave the man. There was something in his scent that stirred a memory buried beneath months of survival. Fire, concrete, sirens, his voice. Owen Callahan. She had once stood beside him through sirens and gunfire, padded through hallways under his command, slept beside his boots. Then came the day she didn't come back. Until now. She took one last step forward and stopped less than 2 feet from him. Owen stirred. His head slumped to the side, eyelids fluttering like trapped wings. A hoarse, broken breath escaped his lips. His cracked mouth moved with no sound. Then slowly, achingly, his eyes opened. Shadow whined low in her throat. Owen blinked, his vision swimming. Shapes resolved into outlines. And then, those eyes. Amber, intelligent, focused. He knew those eyes. Shadow? His voice was sandpaper, barely more than breath. Is that really you? Shadow inched forward and pressed her nose to his boot, then up toward his knee. Scout stood a few feet away, uncertain. He watched his mother break the silence of stillness, and finally stepped forward himself, head lowered, sniffing the man cautiously. Owen let out a laugh, strangled and cracked by emotion. You're alive, he whispered. His eyes welled with tears that froze before they could fall. You're alive, and you have a kid. Scout flinched at the tone in Owen's voice but stood his ground. Shadow let out a soft exhale, her body relaxing. She lowered her head and leaned it gently against Owen's leg. And in that moment, the cold didn't matter. The ropes didn't matter. The pain faded under the impossible warmth blooming in his chest. For the first time in 3 days, Owen Callahan felt like he might make it out alive. 17 miles away, in the rustic town of Hailston, April Monroe pressed a gloved hand against her temple, staring at the snow-covered trail map posted outside the ranger station. The ink had faded, but one name kept catching her eye. Eli Robbins Trailhead, named after the retired mountain guide who had led search parties for decades before disappearing from public life 5 years ago. April turned to the small office built beside the map. Smoke curled from a stovepipe chimney. She stepped up the wooden steps and knocked. The door opened to reveal Eli Robbins himself, a man in his late 60s, still tall despite the slump of age. He wore a heavy green wool jacket patched at the elbows, a snow-dusted beanie, and jeans caked in mud. His beard was silver and wild, and his eyes, sharp, blue, and deeply tired, studied April for a long second before speaking. "Not many people come knocking in a storm," he said. "I'm looking for someone," she replied. "Actually, two someones." Eli didn't move. April pulled out a folded photo, Owen Callahan's ID on one side, Lily's picture on the other. "The man was investigating a trafficking ring, went missing 3 days ago. The girl is my cousin, last seen a month ago." Eli studied the photos, his eyes flicking between them. Then he looked past her, out at the snow drifting across the trailhead. "I saw a man," he said after a pause. "Bound, being pushed into the pines, 3 days ago. Didn't know his name, but he was wearing a badge on his hip." April's breath caught. "Why didn't you report it?" Eli's jaw tightened. "2 men in black jackets followed him. They saw me watching, told me to keep my damn mouth shut unless I wanted company. I've seen what kind of company they keep." April didn't push. Instead, she asked, "Can you show me where?" Eli hesitated, then nodded. "Saddle up," he said. "But if you're going into Blacktail, you better be ready for more than just snow." Back in the woods, Owen forced himself to speak. "Shadow, I need you to help me out of this. Please." Shadow moved behind him, sniffing the rope binding his wrists to the tree. She let out a short bark, more breath than sound, and began tugging gently. Her teeth found the frayed end of the rope. She pulled. The knot didn't give. She adjusted. Pulled again. It would take time. Scout circled nearby, keeping a watchful eye on the tree line. He was young, but he sensed something, like the woods themselves were holding their breath. Owen closed his eyes. Shadow's warmth pressed against his back as she worked. Her breath steamed over his shoulder. He felt the first thread of hope begin to untangle inside him. He wasn't alone anymore. The wind had shifted again. It no longer howled. It whispered, low and constant, brushing snow from the trees in soft sighs. Dusk crept over Blacktail Ridge in bruised purple hues, swallowing color and sound. In the hollow beneath the trees, the air was so cold it felt sharp in the lungs, and still Owen Callahan lay bound to the tree, unmoving. But he was no longer alone. Shadow crouched close, her powerful frame steady despite the cold. She had seen blood before, spilled it even. But the stillness of the man tied to the tree triggered something deeper. This was not prey. This was someone she once guarded, someone she once slept beside in the back of patrol trucks and followed into fire. She sniffed along the rope, the thick hemp caked in ice and dried blood. The knot was tight and buried behind him, but not impossible. With slow calculation, she opened her jaws and bit down, not hard, not yet. She tested the fiber. It didn't snap, but gave slightly under pressure. Scout lingered nearby, pacing in short circles, ears pinned, tail stiff. His instinct told him to stay wary, to flee from the scent of human pain and the looming weight of stillness. But Shadow's calm presence anchored him. He stopped and crept closer, nose brushing against Owen's leg. No reaction. Shadow began to gnaw. It wasn't frantic, it was purposeful. Bite, pull, pause. Bite again. The cold bit deeper as the sun dropped. Time lost meaning. Owen's head lolled to the side, face pale beneath bruises. His breaths were shallow. He hadn't woken since they'd arrived, and the warmth had long drained from his fingertips. If Shadow didn't work faster, instinct wouldn't be enough to keep him alive. Scout moved in beside her. His young teeth weren't as sharp, but he understood. He bit at the knot's edge, tugged, and the fibers shifted slightly. His tail flicked once in excitement. Progress. Together, they worked. Miles below the ridge, the light from a single lantern cut through the growing dark. Eli Robbins adjusted the straps on his snowpack and checked the scope of his hunting rifle out of habit. He hadn't used it in years, not since leaving the force and retreating into the woods, but he still maintained it like a ritual. Old habits died harder than the pain that birthed them. Eli was a man carved by wind and silence, 68, with a lean, wiry frame and hands calloused from decades of hiking rough terrain. His face bore the marks of sun and grief, deep lines around the eyes, a beard the color of old steel, and a long scar across his left cheek from a car bomb 2 decades ago, back when he was still part of the anti-trafficking task force. That had been before his daughter disappeared, before his wife left, before he stopped talking to people who didn't listen. But April Monroe had made him listen. Now she followed him step for step, snow crunching beneath her boots as they ascended a narrow ridge. April's face was flushed from cold and exertion, her breath short. She had tied her brown hair beneath a wool cap, and her green scarf was dusted with frost. She didn't complain once. Eli respected that. "You said the van was spotted up this trail," she said, panting. "What else?" "3 nights ago," Eli replied, voice gravel low. 2 men, one driving, one in the back. I saw them push a body, maybe alive, into the trees. I thought it was a warning, been getting those for years. You said nothing. I had no proof, he said, and I didn't want to bury another kid until you showed me his photo. April nodded silently. They pressed on. The woods thickened. Branches clawed at their coats, and underfoot the terrain grew rough. Rocks under snow, hidden holes. It would be easy to twist an ankle or fall through thin ice. But Eli's pace didn't slow. He had buried his silence for too long. Tonight, he was going to speak with his feet. Up above, Shadow paused. The last threads of the rope had begun to fray, and her jaw ached from the cold. Scout had worn down one side of the knot, and a final twist from Shadow's teeth finally gave the cord a shiver of slack. With one last growl, she yanked sideways, and the rope snapped. Owen slumped forward, unconscious, his body no longer bound to the tree but still tangled in exhaustion. Shadow circled around to his front, nudging his chest, then his cheek. This time, a breath caught in his throat. His eyes opened, barely. The whites were rimmed in red, his pupils slow to focus. He blinked once, twice. "Shadow," he rasped, voice like gravel. "You came back." She pressed her muzzle to his shoulder and let out a low whine. Scout watched from behind, tense and uncertain. Owen tried to lift his arms but winced, too stiff, too cold. Shadow moved closer, lowering her body beside him, pressing her side against his chest. Her warmth bled into him like fire beneath his skin. Scout, after a beat of hesitation, curled up on his other side, his soft puppy frame nestled against Owen's ribs. They stayed that way for a long while. 3 bodies in the snow, bound by instinct and memory. As darkness deepened, clouds rolled across the moon. Wind kicked up again, howling through the trees. But within that small circle of life, warmth had begun to return. Owen whispered something into the fur at Shadow's neck. It wasn't a command. It was a thank you, and maybe a prayer. The first light of morning stretched across Blacktail Ridge like thin fingers of gold, barely warming the frozen earth. Snow clung to every pine needle and branch, and beneath the white silence, 3 survivors slowly emerged from a night that had tested every breath they had left. Owen Callahan stirred first. His body ached. Deep, grinding pain in every joint, the ache of hunger tearing through his stomach like glass. His lips were cracked, his throat dry, his limbs trembling. But he was alive. And beside him, pressed close in the snow, were 2 sentinels of the wilderness who had not left his side, Shadow and Scout. Shadow stood as soon as Owen tried to rise, shaking snow from her coat in a spray of frost. Her breath steamed in the cold, eyes alert but calm. She took a few steps downhill, turned her head, and looked back. Owen caught the signal. He braced himself against a fallen branch, using it as a crude walking stick, and followed. Scout bounded ahead, ears perked, tail high. Though still young, his frame not yet filled out, paws too big for his stride, he moved with eager purpose. His fur had grown thick against the snow. In the wilderness, he had learned more than most dogs twice his age. Shadow led them down a narrow slope where the snow thinned and the trees opened to reveal a shallow stream, its surface layered in thin ice. Owen exhaled heavily at the sight. His legs nearly gave out. Shadow padded to the water's edge and dipped her paw onto the ice, testing. Then, with one sharp lunge, she punched through, sending a cold splash across the stones. A flicker of silver darted beneath the surface. Her muscles tensed. She struck again. A small fish wriggled out from beneath the ice, thrashing against the stone and snow. Shadow clamped her jaws gently around it and brought it back to Owen, placing it at his feet. Scout barked and dove in beside her, less graceful, crashing into the stream with the enthusiasm of youth. It took him 3 tries, but eventually he caught his prize, a smaller fish, and dropped it proudly beside his mother's. Owen stared at the 2 fish, blinking in disbelief. "You've got to be kidding me." Shadow sat down with quiet dignity, while Scout panted, tail wagging. Owen knelt beside the stream and with stiff fingers broke off a few more pieces of ice, pressing them to his lips and letting the melt trickle down his throat. His fingers found the small flint striker he'd always carried in his belt pouch, a habit ingrained from years on remote cases. It took time and clumsy effort, but he sparked a small fire beside a patch of rocks and slowly roasted the fish over the embers. The smell of cooked flesh filled the clearing. It wasn't much, but it was enough to keep his vision from blurring and his hands from shaking. Shadow and Scout lay beside him as he ate, resting but alert. They had brought him life, and now they would bring him purpose. After eating, Owen sat quietly for several minutes, warming his hands by the fire. When he rose again, he walked steadier, if still slow. Shadow took point again, guiding him along the edge of the stream. The snow here was thinner, packed down, not by animals, but by something larger. Boot prints, several sets, overlapping, some deeper, some lighter. Scout sniffed frantically, zigzagging along the trail. Then, ears perked, he darted toward a low thicket under a spruce tree and began to dig. Owen limped over. Beneath a layer of frozen brush was a canvas satchel, old and damp, half buried in snow. Owen knelt, fingers cautious, and opened the flap. Inside were plastic sleeves, laminated identification cards. Not just 1 or 2, dozens. Some with American flags, some with Department of Homeland Security emblems, some male, some female, different names, different faces. He pulled out one. The woman in the photo had haunted the Bozeman Missing Persons Board 6 months earlier. Another matched a suspect he once interrogated in Nevada, now presumed dead. Fake IDs, trafficked identities. This was a drop point. Owen rose slowly and looked around. The boot prints scattered here. Tire tracks, old, nearly vanished under new snow, lined the edge of the stream bed. The ground had been compacted, worn flat by weight and repetition. This wasn't a trail, it was a transfer site. He knelt again and whispered, more to himself than to anyone, "They're moving people through here." Shadow stood still as a statue, as if she understood the gravity of what he'd just discovered. Scout returned to his side and sat, tongue lolling, unaware of the weight of their find, but proud nonetheless. They didn't stay long. Owen's instincts buzzed with unease. Something about the air felt thinner here, as though the forest itself held its breath. He followed the stream a bit farther, finding a rise in the terrain, a small ridge overlooking the clearing. From here, he could see how vehicles might enter from the north, briefly hidden from view by the tree line, make the drop, and leave without ever touching the road. He memorized the layout, then turned back toward the deeper forest. "Let's find higher ground," he said to Shadow. "I need to know where they went next." 20 miles away, April Monroe crouched low behind the rusted metal siding of an abandoned warehouse. Her breath came in controlled bursts, visible in the cold air. The structure was as lifeless as it had looked on approach. No lights, no sound, but her gut said otherwise. A few feet away, buried under a tangle of brambles, she had found a jacket. It was small, pale blue, the kind of thing a teenage girl might wear on a cold night. Inside the collar, stitched faintly in pink thread, were the letters, L. Monroe. April stood motionless for a long time, the jacket clutched to her chest. Her heart was racing, not from the cold, but from the realization that Lily had been here. Maybe days ago, maybe longer. She was close. She circled the building. The door was padlocked, but fresh footprints led around the rear wall, now faded but still visible in the crusted snow. There was movement here, recent, deliberate. April snapped a few photos with her phone, took a breath, and stepped back from the building. She didn't have the strength to go in alone. Not yet. But she wasn't leaving either. She turned and walked toward her car, jacket still in her arms. The forest deepened into stillness as dusk approached. Snow blanketed the ground with a deceptive softness, hiding uneven roots and sharp stones beneath. Every step was a struggle, especially for Owen, who leaned heavily on Shadow for support. His legs still trembled from days without food, but his breath had steadied, and there was clarity in his eyes now. worn but focused. Scout darted ahead, his tan and black coat barely visible among the brush. The young German shepherd was quick and eager, sniffing, circling, ears flicking back as he picked up scents. Owen could see the faint outline of a structure through the trees, a squat, weathered warehouse, hunched low to the earth like it was trying not to be seen. They approached from the north, where old tire tracks had pressed deep into frozen mud, half hidden beneath fresh snow. Rust flaked from the corrugated metal siding. Most of the windows were boarded up with planks. A crooked chimney jutted from one end of the roof, long dead. Owen crouched behind a tree, watching. Scout slinked forward and sniffed around the foundation. His nose froze at a corner where the metal wall met a cluster of rocks. He pawed at something beneath the snow, then let out a sharp bark. Owen moved to his side and saw it, a gap in the wall, hidden behind a draped canvas, a crawl space, maybe used for smuggling or storage. Just as he reached for it, Shadow trotted forward, sniffed the air, and stopped. She turned sharply, ears pointed back toward the woods. A growl rumbled low in her throat. Owen froze. He knew that sound. Without a glance back, Shadow sprinted into the trees. "Go," Owen whispered. "I've got this." Scout didn't hesitate. He pressed his nose to the gap again and began to push forward. Owen followed, crawling through the narrow passage and emerging into a dim, cold chamber lined with crates and rusting shelves. The air inside was heavy, like wet stone. Scout took the lead, weaving between stacks, heading for a stairwell on the far side. Owen followed him down. The basement was unfinished, bare concrete and old piping. A broken bulb dangled uselessly above. Scout stopped at a rusted steel door and scratched once. A sound came from inside, a cough, quiet and trembling. Owen pushed it open. Two girls huddled together inside. One had matted brown hair and sunken cheeks, maybe 16. The other was slightly older, strawberry blonde, with pale skin and green eyes rimmed red from crying. Their wrists were zip-tied, ankles bruised. They stared at him, silent. "It's okay," Owen said softly. "You're not forgotten. I swear that." He pulled out his pocket knife and cut the zip ties. The older girl flinched, then exhaled in relief. "Who are you?" the younger one asked, voice shaking. "I'm a cop," Owen replied, "but right now I'm just someone getting you out of here." Scout stepped into the room, tail wagging gently. The girls shrank at first, then relaxed when the young shepherd nuzzled the older girl's hand. Owen crouched beside them, exhaustion pulling at his shoulders. "Can you walk?" The girls nodded, unsure but desperate. "Then let's go." At that same moment, deep in the forest behind the warehouse, April Monroe was running. Her breath came in short, ragged bursts, fogging in the icy air. She'd been spotted. Two men had seen her circling the perimeter after she found Lily's jacket snagged on a fence post. She didn't wait for questions. She ran. Branches whipped against her face, snow clawed at her boots, and panic burned in her chest. The trees closed in tighter, the light dimming as she veered downhill through a narrow ravine. Behind her, footsteps, voices. They were gaining. She tripped over a root and went sprawling into a snowbank. Her coat tore at the sleeve. She scrambled to her feet and froze. A shape stood in the snow ahead, tall, familiar. A German shepherd. Shadow. April gasped, not from fear, but disbelief. Shadow took a step forward. Her gaze was sharp, intense, but not hostile. Then, from the trees beside her, a smaller shepherd bounded out. Scout. April couldn't breathe. "You're alive," she whispered. The dogs didn't wait. Shadow turned and trotted into the trees, glancing back once. April hesitated only a second, then followed. She had no idea where they were leading her, but she trusted them more than the gunmen behind her. And in that moment, she knew something bigger was happening here. Back in the basement, Owen guided the girls through the narrow hallway. Scout led the way, nose low and alert. At the top of the stairs, Owen paused, listening. The silence above had changed, less still, more expectant. They stepped into the warehouse's main room. A groan echoed from the corner. The guard Shadow had downed earlier was still there, bound, glaring at them with blood on his jacket. "You're dead," he spat at Owen. "They'll find you." Owen didn't flinch. He pointed to the girls. "You've already lost." Scout growled low, stepping forward until the man looked away. Owen turned to the girls. "Stay close." He led them out into the cold once more, toward the trees, toward the trail that would lead, eventually, back to life. And somewhere, deeper in the forest, Shadow was still guiding the other lost soul home. The sun crept through the forest canopy, pale and cold, barely warming the thick layer of snow blanketing the ground. Owen stood at the tree line, unshaven and bruised but steady, one arm loosely draped over Lily's shoulders. Beside him stood the other girl, Ellie, smaller, silent, and visibly trembling. The warehouse loomed behind them, a squat skeleton of rusted steel and rot, no longer hiding its horrors. Scout sat at Owen's feet, tail thumping softly, eyes fixed toward the forest trail. Shadow, alert and still, stood beside April. Her ears flicked at every sound, her stance protective. The older shepherd had become more than just a rescuer. She was now the sentinel between justice and chaos. April adjusted the strap of her messenger bag. Her auburn hair, matted and damp, clung to her neck beneath a wool beanie. Her coat had a fresh tear near the left shoulder where she'd scraped a tree branch while running. She was panting from exertion, but her eyes burned with resolve. The encounter with Shadow had shaken her, but also clarified her path. "We need help now," she said, her breath fogging in the air. "They won't stay quiet forever." "I know," Owen replied, pulling a metal case from his belt. It was battered, scratched nearly beyond recognition, but still functional. An emergency signaling beacon, standard issue for undercover operations in rural regions. He flicked the panel open. A red button blinked in rhythmic pulses like a weak heartbeat. "Does it still work?" April asked. Owen hesitated. Only one way to find out. He pressed it. There was no sound, no flare, just a sudden burst of static heat beneath the casing, followed by a blue glow at the base. The beacon emitted a high-frequency pulse that only tactical receivers in the area would detect. If the local station was scanning for missing agents, he had a chance. A long, tense minute passed. No one spoke. The forest seemed to hold its breath. Then, in the distance, wheels on ice. Tires. Several. From the tree line, 3 dark SUVs emerged, their sides marked with the tan and gold insignia of the Montana Department of Criminal Investigations. The doors swung open before the engines stopped. First out was Lieutenant Bryce Hammond, mid-40s, tall, with a grizzled jaw and deep lines carved into his brow. His winter jacket was regulation black, patched with years of wear. He moved with the alertness of a man who had seen too much and expected worse. "Owen Callahan," Bryce said, stepping forward. "You look like hell." "Feels about right," Owen muttered, managing a dry smile. "Where are the suspects?" "Warehouse basement. 1 injured, 2 possibly fled north," Owen replied. "But we've got 2 survivors." Bryce nodded. With a gesture, he signaled 2 officers forward. Agent Carla Dunn, short, quick-eyed, always the first to volunteer for field rescue, and Deputy Victor Lee, a quiet Korean-American in his 30s, built like a linebacker but gentle as a priest. As they moved toward the girls, Owen turned to Shadow and Scout. "Stay close." But Shadow was already moving, darting into the warehouse like she had unfinished business. April blinked, surprised, then followed with a frown. "Where's she going?" The answer came 5 seconds later, a scream from inside. One of the suspects had been hiding, preparing to ambush from a shadowed corridor, but Shadow had smelled him before anyone else. Bryce raised his sidearm and ran. Inside, they found Shadow snarling atop the man, teeth bared but not biting yet. The man, early 30s, thin, snake-like, was trying to crawl backward with 1 boot missing. "He's got a blade!" April shouted. The man lunged up. He never got the chance to use it. Scout, bursting through the open door, hit him in the side like a missile. The knife clattered to the ground as both dogs pinned him, snarling. Bryce moved in with cuffs. "Secure him!" he barked. Minutes later, 3 suspects were restrained. 2 girls were safe. 1 detective, frostbitten and bruised, was standing tall. And 2 dogs, one once thought dead, the other just learning what it meant to protect, had saved the day. Outside, the snow began to fall again, slowly, gently. Later, wrapped in thermal blankets, April sat on the tailgate of a patrol truck. Lily lay sleeping beside her, her breathing calm. Across the lot, Owen was getting patched up by field medics, wincing as disinfectant hit his cracked hands. Shadow sat nearby, watching him. April pulled out her voice recorder and clicked it on. "This is April Monroe, independent reporter, former regional columnist for Cascade Herald. Today I watched a detective fight for his life. I watched 2 dogs save him, and I found my cousin, alive, scared, but alive." She looked at the trees. "This story was never about just one girl. It's about all the ones still missing, the ones no one's looking for. I won't let this end with headlines and silence. I'll write it. I'll name them, all of them." She paused. "And maybe then, they'll finally be seen." Shadow looked up as if she understood. April smiled faintly, tears shining in her lashes. Scout, curled beneath Lily's blanket, let out a soft snore. Justice had taken a bite back. The town of Alder Creek, tucked in the folds of Montana's wilderness, stirred slowly back to life. Days after the raid, snow still drifted from the ever-gray skies, dusting rooftops and pine branches with a quiet grace that almost felt like forgiveness. But beneath that calm, something had shifted, something profound, irreversible. At the county hospital, Owen Callahan sat by the window of room 203. Bandages wrapped his ribs and wrist, and a faint scar curved across his jaw. His eyes, once bloodshot and sunken, had regained their old sharpness. A mug of lukewarm coffee steamed on the sill. He hadn't touched it. Beside his chair lay Shadow, curled into a black and tan crescent, her ears twitching even in sleep. Time had softened the rigid discipline she once carried in every step, but not her spirit. Even now she kept her paws inches from his boot, as though afraid he'd vanish again. Across the room, Scout gnawed gently at a knotted rope toy, his amber eyes watching his mother, mimicking her every breath. Though only 11 months old, his shoulders were broadening, his coat thickening. He was growing into his instincts and his purpose. A knock came. The door opened to reveal Lieutenant Bryce Hammond, this time without his tactical vest. Instead, he wore a gray blazer over a flannel shirt. His salt and pepper hair looked recently trimmed, and his leather boots tracked in melting snow. "How's the hero?" he asked, stepping in. Owen chuckled, wincing. "Which one?" Bryce glanced at the dogs. "Point taken." He set a manila folder on the table. "All charges filed, 6 arrests confirmed. 2 more suspects caught trying to cross into Canada. The girls are with their families now, including April's cousin." At the mention of April, Owen's face softened. "She's heading back east," Bryce added. "Her piece goes live tomorrow morning. Word is, national syndication already picked it up." Owen nodded. "She deserves that. She didn't just chase a story, she fought for it." Bryce paused, then looked at Shadow. "By the way, the department met this morning, voted unanimously." He bent down and clipped something onto Shadow's collar. A silver tag with the department's crest and the engraving, "Honorary K9, Shadow." She lifted her head at the sound of the tag. When she saw Bryce, she licked his hand once, then rested her chin back on the floor. Bryce stood. "Scout starts formal training next week. K9 Academy's making an exception, says he's already passed the hardest test." "He saved lives," Owen said. "He's more than ready." The lieutenant smiled faintly. "You look good, Owen. Rest up." He left. Later that afternoon in the town square, a small gathering formed beneath the white gazebo framed by pine garlands and flickering lanterns. The wind whistled low, and townsfolk came wrapped in coats and scarves, holding candles and photos. A memorial for the recovered and for the unnamed. Mayor Laurel Whitaker, a tall woman with striking white hair and a wool coat buttoned to her throat, gave a brief speech. Her voice cracked when she read the names of victims rescued, then fell silent for the ones who never came home. Owen stepped forward, wearing his old field jacket and a black turtleneck beneath it. His hand trembled slightly as he unfolded a slip of paper. "I won't speak long," he began. "I just want to say one thing." He glanced at Shadow and Scout, both sitting just off the platform, Scout's tail flicking in the snow. "If not for 2 souls who don't speak our language, I wouldn't be standing here. They didn't ask for thanks. They didn't hesitate. There are animals who understand the human heart better than we understand each other. These 2, they found me, they fought for me, and they reminded me that loyalty doesn't die. It waits." He paused. "I owe them my life." A hush followed, then applause, quiet, reverent. 3 weeks later, in a small apartment in Portland, April Monroe sat at her desk surrounded by notes, binders, and photos. Her laptop glowed with the published headline, "Shadow in the Pines, How a Missing Canine and Her Pup Led the Rescue That Shattered a Trafficking Ring." Her name sat in bold below. The phone rang. She didn't answer. Instead, she turned to the photo frame beside her keyboard. Inside it, a picture of Lily, smiling wide with her arms wrapped around Scout. His ears were too big for his head, one cocked sideways like he was trying to understand the world. April smiled back. She reached for her notepad. The next case was already calling. Sometimes, miracles do not come with thunder or lightning. Sometimes they arrive quietly, on four paws, through the snow, in the form of two dogs who refused to forget a man who once believed in them. Shadow and Scout were not just animals, they were messengers. Of loyalty, of love, and perhaps of something divine. In the darkest forest, God lit a path through creatures who could not speak, but understood what many humans have long forgotten: to never give up on someone you love. And maybe that's the lesson, for all of us watching. In our busy lives, may we pause and look closely, because sometimes grace is hidden in the simple, in the overlooked. A dog's devotion, a stranger's courage, a soul's quiet return. If this story touched your heart, don't let it stop here. Share this story. Comment your thoughts. And if you believe in the power of love, loyalty, and God's quiet miracles, type Amen below. Hit the like button, subscribe for more true stories of hope, and may the Lord bless you and protect your loved ones.